for any opening comments he may have.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this important hearing about the latest developments in Iraq. In recent months, a path of violence and chaos has burned across the Middle East. The unrest has left thousands of dead in its wake and driven tens of thousands from their homes. A civil war in Syria has spilled across the border, and now Iraq teeters on the brink. Since December, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL or ISIS, has marched across Iraq with lethal efficiency. Fallujah, Ramadi, and Mosul have fallen to their control. Hundreds of Iraqi soldiers have been killed or have laid down their weapons, and the military equipment they left behind, some even supplied by the United States, is now in the hands of these fanatics. The border between Iraq and Syria is gone. ISIS is advancing towards the Jordanian border, and ISIS's leaders have declared an Islamic caliphate promising to rule with a band of barbarism out of the darkest chapters in human history. ISIS is an existential threat to our allies in the region, and it's a threat to the United States. We've seen this story before, and we know how it ends. When Russia withdrew from Afghanistan in the late 1980s, that country was allowed to become a no-man's land. Violent extremists found a safe haven in which to strengthen their ranks, train their recruits, and plan attacks on the United States and our allies. We cannot allow Iraq to follow the same path, to become another safe haven from which another September 11th could be launched. So how are we going to meet the challenge? In my mind, we need to use all the tools at our disposal, because in the end, there's no military solution to this problem. We need to see real political changes in Iraq, more inclusive policies, and a greater effort to avoid sectarian conflict. I have real doubts that Prime Minister Maliki can lead Iraq into this new era. In fact, Maliki must go, and the sooner the better. I have real concerns about Iran's support for the Iraqi regime. Even if the United States and Iran seem to share a mutual concern over ISIS, I don't see how Iranian and American goals can be aligned, either in the short term or the long term. I don't think the U.S. should deal with Iran in this regard. We also need to bear in mind that this is not solely an Iraqi problem. While ISIS grew out of al-Qaeda in Iraq, ISIS grew in strength and numbers while fighting in Syria. ISIS is a regional problem. This is a spillover from the Syrian civil war, and fighting ISIS will require a regional solution. The right time to train and equip the moderate Syrian opposition was well over a year ago. That's when I introduced the Free Syria Act. It would have assisted moderate rebels to fight against both the Assad regime and the extremist elements of the opposition like ISIS. I'm glad that a few weeks ago, the administration announced its support for a $500 million train and equip program for the moderate Syrian opposition. But we waited so long, and by now ISIS has gained so much territory and momentum, they are far more difficult to stop than they were a year and a half, or 2 years ago. I cannot help but wonder what would have happened if we had committed to empowering the moderate Syrian opposition last year. Would ISIS have grown as it did? Would the opposition have been able to apply enough pressure to Assad to compel him to a diplomatic transition? And by the way, we passed a bill in the House yesterday unanimously slapping sanctions on Hezbollah. Hezbollah has moved in. It's a puppet of Iran, and they've moved into Syria on the side of Assad and have helped tip the balance in Assad's favor. The hypotheticals and the what-ifs break my heart, because even if we do the right thing now, it will mean small consolation to the orphaned child, the grieving mother, or the family in a refugee camp in Syria. I supported the President's decision to send assessment teams to Iraq, but I'm cautious about future action. We cannot end up in another sectarian quagmire in Iraq. And so I'm interested in learning about the administration's vision for how to meet this challenge. I'm grateful to our witnesses for testifying today and for consulting with Congress about our next steps. We must be partners moving forward as we determine what the U.S. role should be in Iraq, and the Congress must play an important role. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk a little bit about the division of Iraq, or keeping Iraq whole. On the one hand, when you look at some of these borders in the Middle East, they were all done by the colonialists, and I have often felt that why should we be obligated to maintain those borders? Iraq is not a real state. It was slapped together. You've got the Kurds, you've got the Shia and the Sunni, who really don't want to be part of each other. And so particularly the Kurds, who have autonomy now, practically have their own nation, and probably will proclaim it very shortly. So my sympathies would be to say to the Kurds, well, why should we suck you back into Iraq? You have the right to your own nation. And frankly, nobody has ever explained to me why the Palestinians are entitled to self-determination, but somehow the Kurds are not. I don't know. I don't think that's fair, quite frankly. On the other hand, we're told that if the Kurds break off, there's practically no way that you could stop the radicals from dominating what's left of Iraq, and that the Kurds provide some sort of a counterbalance to prevent the radicals from gaining control. I'd like to hear from both of you what your views are on keeping Iraq intact or not.
Let me address that briefly, and I can turn to my colleague Alyssa. As I described in the testimony of a functioning federalism concept, it's a concept that is under the Iraqi Constitution and that would recognize a very substantial devolution of powers. There's a recognition in Iraq that from the center out, you're never going to fully control all of these areas, particularly given the capacity of ISIL. And there's also recognition that locals alone and tribal forces alone cannot defeat ISIL. They need the support and resources of the central state. So therefore, a functioning federalism concept, which is under the Constitution, is really the model that is an emerging consensus within Iraq. The Kurdish region now shares about a 1,000-kilometer border with what is effectively ISIS. We're in active conversations with the Kurds and the Kurdish regional government to make sure that they are able to manage that problem. They also face a very serious geostrategic environment, given just the geography of the region. But believe me, we are in a very active conversation with the Kurdistan region about their future in Iraq. But significantly, it's important to recall that on April 30th, 14 million Iraqis voted in a national election. That included about a 60% turnout in Nineveh province, a 50% turnout in Anbar province. There's a 328-member parliament which has just convened. Today was the first session with the new Speaker of Parliament, a very moderate, pragmatic Sunni leader, an emerging Sunni leader who secured the support of all political blocs. And today in the Parliament, again, its first session, they all stood together, all groups, to denounce the very horrific tragedy inflicted by ISIL against Christians in Mosul. The country overall, the people do not want to divide into three different countries, or three different states. There is no easy solution for that. When you game it out, actually, the consequences are quite serious.
Mr. McGurk, it's my feeling, correct me if I'm wrong, that the Kurds, the consensus among the Kurds is that they want to separate from Iraq.
Yeah, the Kurds, as a lot of Kurds say to me, I think the heart of every Kurd wants an independent state. There's no question. I think we have to recognize that. We also have to recognize that the Kurds are among our very closest friends in the region. We have to have a very close partnership with the Kurds, and we do. But there's also a pragmatic element, given the realities, given the economic realities and other things, in which we want to work very closely with the Kurds on their future. And I think the future within the constitutional structure, the Kurds right now, for example, are choosing their nominee to be the next president of Iraq, and we hope to have that sorted out over the coming days. But again, within the constitutional framework, and we've had conversations with Masoud Barzani and others just over the last week when I was in Erbil and then Sulaymaniyah with the leadership of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, about their future, about how we can work with them on their future, and about a future within the constitutional framework. And at least in the near term, I think that's the best way to go.
I just don't feel that it's fair to hold the Kurds hostage, because we've unfortunately screwed up things in Iraq, and everything is falling to pieces. We're essentially saying to the Kurds, you know what, you have to be the glue that keeps Iraq together, and therefore we're going to deny you your aspirations. I'm not quite sure that's fair. Ms. Slotkin?
So I'll just speak to it from the security aspects. You know, given the ISIL threat, the strongest single blunt to that threat would be a strong, capable federal government in Iraq that's actually able to exert control and influence to push back on that threat. And while I guess it is sort of a there is, and there has long been this idea that Iraq can split into three pieces. I just sort of ask the question, who's in charge of that western and north central part of Iraq in that model? So while I think, as Brett described, there certainly are lots of folks in the Kurdish regions who have aspirations of independence, think about what that means in that neighborhood and territory that they're left in if you don't have a strong, capable government in Baghdad that's able to blunt those ISIL threats. They've got Syria, they've got the situation on their southern border right there, they've got Iran on the other side. That is a tough neighborhood. So from a security point of view, the single best blunt, frankly, to both ISIL and to a strong, dominant Iranian influence in Iraq is a strong, capable federal government based in Baghdad.
Well, I was going to ask you about Iran, but I see that my time is up. Let me just very quickly say that I hope that the United States does not think that it can be lulled into some kind of partnership with Iran in Iraq. There are some people who feel that because our interests may come together, converge, that maybe we should partner with Iran. I couldn't disagree more. I think that Iran is the lead supporter of terrorism in the world. I think we look at what's happening now with Israel and Gaza, and all the weapons of Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, are provided by Iran. And I just think it would be a tragic error if we somehow thought Iran was a viable partner in Iraq. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.